Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs and share our experience to hopefully help you have your best game. Well, we are recording. How are you doing today, James?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jeremy?
I am well. You said you just had a stressful or very involved some coursework for your master's.
Yes, I just finished a final that ended up being 23 pages long. So it took a good 2 weeks with a very stressful final weekend to get it done, but it's done now, and I get 2 months off before my next class.
Excellent.
So
What class is it that you're finishing?
I just finished. It's called Sources of the American Regime. So all about like what led up to America being founded.
Okay. And so like ideas and models of thought and thinkers and what that fed into the founding.
Yes, I read a lot of John Locke.
I bet. John Locke had an overestimation of people's innate goodness, but that's just my rotten opinion. Anyway, okay, well that's cool. I'm glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. So you wanted to talk about, and I could use to talk about it because I've been actually dealing with some of this recently, not in a bad way, but just, dealing with it. I'm going to talk about encounter planning, but specifically non-combat encounter planning. We talked about combat encounters some. I want to talk about non-combat encounters. Where do you want to start? You want to define, I mean, it may sound silly, but do you want to define what a non-combat encounter is?
Yeah, so I think defining the term is always a great place to start with it. And for me, at least in my experience with non-combat encounter, is I've taken that as any scene that you're doing where you are meeting a character or group or whatever that the characters are not already involved with.
Yeah.
And there is a very high likelihood that that will not lead to combat. Now, every player, as we know from almost all role-playing games, can turn a non-combat encounter into a combat encounter.
Can't they?
But generally, as a GM, my thought process for a non-combat encounter is, unless something goes really wrong, this should not lead to combat.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, and I'll throw in there that like any encounter, combat or otherwise, just any encounter, there has to be a reason for it. If you the GM are planning it, you're sitting there and you're saying, well, this session, this is where we left off, this is where the story's going, to whatever extent that you are planning the campaign as, having a structured plot. That's what this applies to. And it has to have a reason. It's not just like, well, let's navel gaze for a while and maybe throw a roll in there. But you're right. Sadly, any encounter, no matter how benign, can turn into a bloody murder festival when you throw in players. It just happens.
It's just in the DNA for some reason.
Unfortunately. Now, there is obviously then a type of encounter, and in this case, we'll talk about the non-combat side of things, that is not a planned encounter. It's something that you are just reacting at the table in the moment to. If we have time, we'll get to that. But let's talk about the planning of. Where are you starting? What are you thinking? Where are your pain points?
Yeah, for me, the biggest pain points for planning non-combat encounters is, one, I will very often find a place where a non-combat encounter will make sense, but then trying to craft it in a way that is either not immediately going to make the players assume that there is combat and lead to the problem of murder hobo combat that shouldn't probably exist, or on the other side of things, I have an idea for a non-combat encounter that I want to put into a story and then making it fit that story well, because I have a general idea this would be cool to do, but how am I going to tie that in? Because at least in my experience, because I'm so new to this, I don't have long planned out ideas started as well. It's more, okay, I'm trying to plan for the next 1 or 2 sessions. This is something that maybe could lead to something 5 or 6 sessions in the future, but I'm not to that point yet.
Right. And I think another issue that's worth considering is scope. That is the
Hmm.
scope
Mhm.
of the non-combat encounter. And this is where it's challenging because sometimes we've all had the we've all had the challenge of you think up some kind of, say a social interaction. The heroes show up at the whatever, how's this? Actually, just recently, in my Star Trek Adventures campaign, the player characters, along with a bunch of other officers from other ships in their little fleet, all attended a strategic briefing, and there were jokes about like, great, we have meetings in PowerPoint in the future. We just cannot get away from that. But one of the things that I wanted to do was like the admiral gave this whole presentation. That was a bit of an info dump. And then she challenged these officers, listen, we need to come up with solutions. And then she broke the meeting, and the idea is they were just supposed to mix, so they could go talk to the officers from other ships and see like what kinds of things. Hey, I have this data here that you collected. Tell me what you're thinking about it, stuff like that. And that worked well. I mean, it put the players in a position where they, through their characters, had to interact with story content and then come up with ideas based on it. And so my vision for the scope of this was hopefully like, well, maybe this will take like half an hour at most of real time at the table as they mix around and things like that. And of course, I always had, the admiral could just call the meeting back to order when I got tired of, or I felt like they were starting to, navel gaze or get super fixated on the thing that has absolutely nothing to do with the plot that I've developed. So I think scope is a big issue, like deciding how much of a chunk of the session should this take up. And actually, I mean more in terms of real time than game time, because you can always say, hey, so you guys were talking for an hour or 2 hours, or oh yeah, you had some really quick conversations, but how much of my table time did I want it to gobble up?
And that's something that I've run into, is trying to find a way to insert that and be like, okay, we've been doing this for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it's been that we've been doing at the table. Going like, okay, I'm going to stop this, without it just being like, and the next thing happens. Because I don't like to cut into that, especially when I have multiple players and I want to let them like talk to one another and role play and do those
Yeah.
kind of things. And then it's like, okay, I understand that this is a great role play section. However, we need to move on if we want to get anywhere within reason.
Right.
And that usually ends up being the problem. But if I go into the planning session going, I want this to be about 30 minutes or an hour, whatever it is, and go, okay, now that I know how long I want it to go, where do I cut that off? Like if they hit this point, is that a good enough spot to move on?
Going back to your point about like how do you get to it? That's what it sounded like you were asking. Like, so I have this idea for a non-combat encounter. Could be like, role playing, it could be investigation, it could be um sneaking around somewhere. There's lots of different things. It could be the dreaded shopping trip. Although actually I would say probably no. It could be any of those things. The question, it sounded like you were getting at, is, well, how do you get them to get to that? Did you
And
ask that?
yeah, and that's kind of one of the things that, just to be open about one of
Yeah.
the campaigns that I'm running, I had set it up to where there's this point where players are gathering intel. And then there is a situation in Traveler where it could be combat, but I had set it up that it basically shouldn't be, that they needed to basically, they've done all this like intel gathering, they're watching this person, now they need to nab the person
Mm.
without it, like, hopefully not being combat, because that's not the goal of what the players are supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But the gathering intel took 2.5 hours, and
Mm.
I'm like, just do the thing. Like, this
It's
is the
tough.
non-combat. Yeah.
I ran into this. That's a really tough and delicate problem. And if you're listening and you've had this trouble as a GM, like, how do you get the players to step away from analysis and information gathering and choose to act. Because I have seen this again and again, and I've seen it actually, it's been really bad times when I've run Gumshoe, because Gumshoe as a system, if you're not familiar with it, and you're a little bit familiar with it, I think, as we talked about it, but in Gumshoe, you don't have to roll to gather information of any sort. You're an expert in whatever. So you just say, hey, I'm an expert in architecture. I have points in architecture. So I walk into this room. Are there any like secret, chambers or something like that? You don't roll. You just get the information. And what I found was that instead of that resulting in a focus on, okay, let's go get stuff done, the players just turned into these like bottom feeders, or they just went along, they just kept vacuuming up information. And I think, some players are just like, ready, shoot, aim. And others want to ready, aim, adjust, aim. They turn into like McClellan. They want everything to be perfect before they're willing to send the army into battle. And then it's like, but you're not doing anything. So that is a really delicate question. I've found solving that works a heck of a lot better if you create pressure on the players from within the story. Hey, you've been talking for 2 hours. You've only got, XYZ time left. Or in the case of Admiral Hebert at Narendra Station just says, okay, everyone get back together. I need some answers now. We need to move out. I think creating pressure within the story works better than saying, damn it, players, get off your butts and act.
And I think part of the issue was I had written this part of the campaign before we had our first combat encounter section. So I don't think that I ever really thought about maybe I should put the self-destruct time button on this before I had written it. So then it became more difficult, which I can do in the future. I do have another question for you really quick. When you are planning out encounters, and this could be combat or non-combat, but I find it more important with non-combat, how do you lay it out? Because I find myself scrolling through information back and forth and covering different things to make sure because the players are asking me information about this is a non-combat encounter. I'm asking this person about this type of information because I'm talking to the shopkeep because I want to know who's come through here. I'm trying to find what type of information do we have? How do you keep track of all that? Do you just put it in bullet points? Do you write it on cards?
You mean,
how do you do that?
So let me make sure I'm clear on this, because I think this is actually really important. If I think you're thinking what I think you're thinking, so you have for example, the strategic planning meeting that they just had at Narendra Station. Okay, great. There's a bunch of information that other crew, the science officer on USS Venture has this perspective, and the chief medical officer on Bellerophon has this perspective or this information, and blah, 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 whatever. And for me, trying to build, this is a little side note, but one of the reasons I wanted to have this planning meeting is, one, I wanted to thrust the player characters into a position where the players had to, they were responsible for making some decisions, and they were in the spotlight because they had gone to this planet and experienced this stuff that the other crews had not. Now, the other crews had other pieces of the puzzle, so it also provided an opportunity. I'm trying to make the station and the other fleet, the other ships and whatnot, make it feel like it's more of an alive, the setting is alive. It's not just you on your ship, you, the characters. It's there are other officers, and I want to try to, it's really challenging, but trying to be oh yeah, Captain such and such, oh yeah, he's really impulsive, or the chief medical officer on this ship is like that. So we gave him an opportunity to role play through that. So what you're saying is, when I'm sitting down and I'm coming up with all these, this idea, there's a lot of information that I'm going to dole out to the players through the NPCs and scrolling feeds of sensor data and junk like that. Okay, where do I put that, and how do I make that? Okay, it depends. It depends on the level. No, it's a stupid answer, but it depends on the level of detail that is important to the story. So some of the stuff, like I know, well, I'm going to have to describe what the planet looks like from, a sensor probe. I don't need to write that down. I'll just make it up like on the fly. Now, you've seen Star Trek Generations, right? Okay.
Mhm.
Remember the stupid Nexus wave that was like all the problems? Anyway, Nexus wave.
Yes, I do.
You do. I thought Generations was not a very good movie, but that's beside the point. So the Nexus wave in our timeline had only happened about a year before all this stuff is happening, because that's Next Generation era. And so I mentioned that these like tetraionic, whatever, gravimetric, blah, 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 gobbledygook power waves that are in this region of space bear a striking resemblance to the Nexus wave. And one of my players is very much a fan of Star Trek, and he was like, "Oh my gosh!" But it was cool because he got it immediately. Then he put that into his character. So it depends on what needs to be. What do the characters need to know and the players need to know to make the story go, and what things will make the story extra cool? Those are the things I make sure that I decide in advance. The rest of the stuff is just generalities, and I make it up on the spot for the most part. Now, when it comes to details that are useful but maybe kind of tedious, like the last time I ran Traveler, I had during this multi-ship space battle, I had a whole bunch of different Sword World ships and Imperial Navy ships and blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. So what I did in advance is I just made up a bunch of ship names and a bunch of captains' names, and I put them in a table on a piece of paper. So I could just refer to it and just throw out a name. Oh yeah, such and such ship just took a hit or something like that. So it sounded more like, oh my gosh, this is so lovely. This is like, realistic or whatever. Some people will probably take issue with this, but I don't care. This is where AI systems can be really useful. This is where ChatGPT or Claude can be really useful. If you have a bunch of names, if you have a bunch of like, okay, what, they walk into the castle, whatever, and they start talking to people. You just need names of people in the shop, people at the harvest bazaar. If you have a character all of a sudden wants to role play, just go to ChatGPT and say, I'm a game master for a fantasy world. Generate 10 male and 10 female names that are of like Germanic or Nordic sounding. And just have a list ready. And then just next to each write like shopkeeper or whatever, do that. Then you're feeding information that fleshes out the moment and makes the world feel more useful, but you've already made all the decisions about, really that's just fluff information. It just adds to it. But the story stuff, like I'll put it on, what I do is I have an outline that's sequenced in the order I think that we're probably going to go. And I make them pretty concise. So like one session will be maybe 2 pages or maybe a 3-page outline on the outside. And that's what I use at the table. And I found that much like taking notes, like for a graduate class, when you take the time to take the notes and you sequence the notes, you don't actually have to refer to the notes that often because you already know what so I do like a 2-column Word document with, and just to keep it really tight. So it's more like it jogs my memory more than I'm referring to it, because I actually don't want to be like this during the session.
Right. No, that's perfect. That's what I was asking. And just kind of to follow that up, do you ever layer information in things like this is general information that they can get from something and then a role will get them more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, so in a general sense, my first layer, I'll use that terminology, and that makes sense. I like that. The first layer of information is what anyone with their eyes open and ears open walking into a space or would know or would notice. Or if you're from whatever, like I actually put together for the Star Trek Adventures campaign a couple of months ago, I put together a slideshow, and this is where I got the hard time about great PowerPoint in the future. But I put together a slideshow and I formatted it to try as best I could to look like an LCARS interface. And it was, this is your briefing document now that you've been assigned to Narendra Station. And I showed it on a big flat screen that I've now got in the garage. So it was like, okay, you're on your way to Narendra Station. Here's this like 10 slide thing that like, here's Admiral Hebert. And it's like as if it's from her. And it has a picture of her, like, welcome to Narendra Station. You're going to do a great job here, you know, soldier. And here are the ships that are assigned to, and here's your mission, and here are the problems, and here's our diplomatic challenges, and blah, 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 blah. So I made it an in-game artifact that I provided directly to them. That's the first layer, and that's like obviously no roles at all. And then it's, if I have, and this is one of the nice things about 2D20 games, but I mean, it's not obviously only in 2D20 games. You know, 2D20 games make use of traits, or they call them different things in different versions of the game. But like, if you're a Vulcan science officer and you say, well, since I'm a Vulcan science officer, and then you include some Shaggy Dog story about why it would make sense where you would understand this more quickly, or you'd pick up on it because you're a Vulcan science officer instead of just like some, you know, dope, then the GM is supposed to take that into account. And so then what I would do is ask, okay, does anyone else have any questions? You're in this briefing room, you're in this this cave, you're in this strange you know, alien ruin, and there's energy arcing around you, and there's a big 5-sided obelisk floating in the middle of the room. I didn't make that up. That's all was in the story stuff. And then based on the characters, you know, what they are, they will just ask questions, and then I'll answer questions based on, you know, feels. You know, usually the science officer is going to ask sciencey things, and the security one's probably going to ask more like security things. So I will take that into account and feed them information that I'm of course telling everybody. But you know, I have tried at times to do like to write something quick on a Post-it note and hand it to them, and then they'd be like, oh, I'm delivering it to the group. My handwriting sucks so much and it slows the game down, so I don't do that. But yeah, then beyond that, I'd say like layer 3 is roles.
Okay.
And then the lovely thing again with 2D20 is once you do a check, a successful check to learn something or figure something out, you can spend 1 momentum and ask 1 additional question, like tagging on to that. So I'll oftentimes be like, do you want to spend any more points? Do you want to spend any points? Like if there's something I know that I would like to tell them, I can prompt them that way, or so.
Perfect. That was great. That's exactly what I needed. I do have a question for you though. When balancing combat and non-combat encounters, sometimes I feel like it's either I run into sessions where I have non-combat encounter followed by non-combat encounter followed by non-combat encounter, or non-combat encounter, combat encounter, non-combat encounter, combat encounter, where it's just like it's either just all of one or just constantly going back and forth, which can be tedious because generally combat encounters take longer, not always, but more often than not, which then can lead to issues of people sitting there being like, we've been playing combat nonstop all session.
Or you get the one player at the table who's like, I want to blow up something. I want to kill something. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I think it's probably better. So you've got this umbrella, encounters or scenes. Let's say same difference. And you can differentiate them into ones involving fighting and ones not involving fighting. Okay. And then you can, I think that the non-combat one thin slices into more other options than combat. But I think that the what you should think about is not so much like above those 2 main categories, like how much tension or pressure is in this encounter. Because I mean, I think that, you know, I've had, especially with Star Trek Adventures, where, you know, the assumption and there is a driving pressure in the game, and there are mechanical expressions of this to be Starfleety. Don't blow stuff up. If you switch your weapon to lethal, you give the GM threat. You know, like if I as the GM want the Klingons to show up with batleths, I have to spend threat. Like you have to buy yourself to murder, because you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to. We're one big happy
Right.
fleet. Um, so I've had plenty of sessions where there's no fighting at all. There's no combat at all, but these so then they're all non-combat encounters, but are they tense, and is there pressure? Is there something, is there immediacy? I think that's the killer, actually. Like combat encounters combat encounters can get very tedious if it's just like ROLL, and then people are checked out when it's not their turn, that kind of thing. But non-combat encounters can get tedious when there's no tension. There's no pressure. There's nothing that's like pushing or pulling the players to like you have to get this done, or you can't do that, and so I think when it comes to balancing, you should ask yourself, okay, in this non-combat encounter, is there pressure on the players? Like, okay, they're let's say they've disguised themselves as people they're not, and they've gone to some like highfalutin social occasion that they shouldn't be at because they need to find some information. So the pressure is we have to stay in disguise, we have to stay hidden, and we have to find out the information we need. And we really should do it quickly, because at some point someone is going to do something stupid like grab an hors d'oeuvre off the buffet table with his hand instead of the correct little fork, and their cover is going to be blown. So I think I think you're right that going back and forth, that becomes kind of boring. But if your non-fighting encounters have tension and there's some pressure, if you can create some anxiety, or even better, like evoke or provoke rather a drive from within your players, we want to get this done, then the issue of balancing one versus the other, or having some kind of a vision of like a proper balance of that, that's not an issue. Now obviously if you have players who like they really love hacking up things now again, or you just know, like you can just sense it at the table, you're like, yeah, Jacob needs to kill something, and then
Right.
you just surf the table as it is and you do that. But yeah, I think tension, pressure, or you provoke something in the players that they have a drive themselves, I think that changes. If you look at it from that perspective first, it changes how you go about building those non-combat scenes.
Perfect. I think that's all the questions that I had for non-combat encounters.
Well then, how do you handle of course travel, you don't have to worry about this at all, experience? Like if you were think about this, because there are some games like and this is one of the things that I kind of lost me on. It was one of the several things in Pathfinder First Edition that just got old for me, is the relentless like service given to gathering the proper amount of experience so that you can be at the proper level to then go to this next thing. How if you were running a game that had that baked into it, how would you go about determining that?
So I've learned two different techniques with it, like leveling systems, that I really enjoy from two different GM friends from playing with them. One of them is, we're just going to cut experience and you are going to level whenever I tell you as GM, which works great in a very like story driven, not quite railroad, but like we have definite points where we're going to hit throughout the story.
Yeah.
Which can be anything that just is a pre-written adventure, or if you've made the adventure and you're like, I want to hit these 5 points on the way from beginning to end to get to where I want the story to be, it works good. If you are dead set on using XP, one of the it's my solo campaign that I've done with a friend of mine for a very long time.
Yeah.
One of the things that he does to balance that is, one, I generally am not I'm going to attack everything I see to gain experience type of player. But even in prepping for this, we kind of determined that if the thing is not actually going to pose any threat to the players, like there's really no chance that this is going to go poorly for you, you don't get XP from the encounter. So my character, when he was level 1, something that was very dangerous that you could have run into, like a goblin, you'll get XP from that goblin. Now that he's level 10 and you run into random 1 or 2 goblins, even though you're by yourself, this is no threat. You're not going to get XP by just going out and fighting a bunch of the tiniest little things that you can run into. It's only when you're in a serious situation. So like when my character had to fight a griffin and it was himself and one other NPC, okay, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
That's different. You're doing this basically solo. That's somewhere where
Or
you can
the
get
goblin
XP.
brings all his cousins and their cousins, and yeah.
Exactly. Or like if my character got ambushed by a bunch of goblins by himself, okay. Him and his party of 3 or 4 NPCs, maybe not. Like even 20 goblins, that's not much of a threat anymore.
That makes a lot of sense as a way to, and I mean, then you're looking at the, if like say 5e, you're looking at the, based on the CR, you can say, okay, this is how many experience points you get out of it. But that's actually if the encounter does not involve risk, and isn't in some way actually challenging, then you are actually not growing from that. I so rarely play level-based games now that I mean virtually all the games I play now are skill-based. And so doling out experience, now that's a whole different animal because you're not doing like level, like story-based leveling. Okay, everyone hits level 3 now because this makes sense. Instead, you're just looking at how people operate within a given session, and then you're doling out experience, and then over time, as they tweak things on their characters, you just have to stay a little bit on top of that to go like, okay, if I want this to actually be challenging for you, because we've been playing for a couple of months, and I know your characters are better, but you're all over the map in terms of what better means for each of you. That can be. The doling out of experience there is easier, I think, because usually you're dealing with smaller numbers, but it can be a little bit more challenging over time, especially when you're planning any kind of encounter, to think about, all right, how are my players' characters better than they were a while back? And it's weird because, Star Trek Adventures doesn't really, it has an experience system, but it's kind of convoluted. And none of my players care because it's Star Trek. It's more iconic, than. So I haven't had to deal with that at all. I recognize here in a few months when we change to something else, I will have to deal with that all over again.
I will say there is one thing to add there that I didn't think about initially, but in that situation, a lot of people will probably ask, okay, then what is my purpose for dealing with lower level threats? Or is there any reason as a GM to write in lower level threats? And how my friend got around that is he would introduce rewards outside of XP. So like as my character's traveling down the road, yeah, 1 or 2 goblins isn't a problem for me, but there's something over there that's going on that might pique my interest. So like there are 1 or 2 goblins attacking this random traveler. Okay, well, it's time for me to go be the big hero and fight the goblins. It's not going to benefit me in XP, but what it can benefit me in is maybe I get some gold. Maybe that person leads to a connection that I need in a town that I'm going to. Whatever that reward could be, it also gives my character the chance, which this can be a story thing, to go, that's actually not worth my time. Like the bandits are roughing up this person. I just don't have time to deal with that. I'm going to move on. That's something that gives your players the opportunity that can actually flesh out their character. Because if you have 2 players like in the same situation and one goes, I don't think that's worth my time, and the other one goes, I think that is worth my time, then you get into the question of, okay, you two, your levels of importance on these things are changing. How are your characters going to respond to that? Is one just going to go along even though he thinks it's a waste of time? Is he going to try to pull the other person and say no, like,
and then you
let
actually
the police
have
deal with this?
You have some character-based role playing, which could be really cool.
Exactly. And I think that is another good thing also to introduce, like that there are benefits outside of XP, like to use Dungeons and Dragons, hitting level 20 is not the only thing that marks your character as being great. Like, hey, you go save this merchant who you had no idea to know this, but now you get a bag of holding. Like being able to put things like that where there are other benefits if you seek out things that are beyond just experience, then you get players thinking, okay, Like, yes, this is an experience thing. I want to get experience to gain levels, but there are other benefits that I can get through these encounters.
Yeah, I agree. Or I mean, I wouldn't think so much bag of holding. I would think more like, oh, he's this merchant, and then he goes into this town, but he actually has some connections, which then benefit you down the road
Right.
because you did the good deed. So so talking about wrapping up, talking about non-combat encounters. What are our big takeaways? What are the things that we would want to huck at people and say, remember these things?
For me, I picked up three things. Number one, make sure you outline, and when you do it, probably do less than you think, because you will be able to figure out more in the moment than you really need to. I will say, make sure you have some way of taking notes as you're doing it in the
Hmm.
moment, though, because you never know how that's going to come back and bite you in the butt later if you don't take notes better than your players. Number two, don't stress very much about balancing combat versus non-combat. Just make sure that you're making everything engaging.
Yeah.
And that's probably something that I need to do better with as a GM, just because I know what's engaging for me, and that's not always the same for everybody else,
Sure.
and finding out the way to balance that. And then number three, when you're planning a non combat encounter, make sure that it has a purpose in the story. You're not just doing this because, well, I've done 3 combat encounters and this doesn't make any sense, but I'm throwing it in there, so we're not rolling a bunch of dice. Make sure that there is something behind it that really is going to benefit the story.
And I've found myself in the position, looking back in retrospect, where I've done that, where I've, oh, we've been doing a lot of fighting. Okay, so we need to do something that's not fighting, but and then it isn't, but then I didn't actually make a connection as to like why is this going on? Why does this fit in the story? And I'll just go back to I second all those things, and I'll just go back to my piece. Like, how do you make it interesting? How do you make it compelling? There has to be either something that's they're risking, or there's got to be some tension, or something is pushing them or pulling them, or as I said earlier, preferably your players get into their characters enough that they decide we need to go get this done. Um,
Yes.
like I had years ago running Pathfinder Kingmaker in the second book of that adventure path from Paizo. And this is after the player characters have settled their piddly little fledgling kingdom, and they've got a town, and it's almost like a triggered event that what happens is this bard, Grigori the Bard, comes in from afar, as frickin' bards do, and starts like getting, popular, and he's telling stories and singing songs like bards do. But what he starts doing is talking trash about these new rulers. And what he's trying to do is, stir up some discord among the ne'er-do-wells and the natural, like, your flat earther types that are, just the angry types that never want to follow whatever, whoever's in charge, they're going to knee jerk against it. So what he's trying to do is stir up discord. And it's not evident, but behind the scenes, he has actually been paid by some petty ruler like 2 kingdoms over to come and like see, all right, how are these clowns gonna, these new folks, how are they gonna respond? And I remember there was this was, we've been playing for a couple of months, and my players were starting to feel very like connected to their little fledgling kingdom. They'd given it a name, and they had a name for their piddly little castle. They were starting to feel like a sense of ownership, which was really great, because then I could hurt them. I could take things away from them and like burn something, or oh, the nice blacksmith. Well, he disappeared in the woods, and they're like, oh, dude, we liked him. Anyway, so there was this whole. They spent a bunch of time figuring out like how are we going to deal with this guy, and how are we going to like outmaneuver him, because we have laws, and we've said we're a nation of laws, so we can't just go hack his head off, because that wouldn't be with the. So they were driven by their own the assumed self-interest through their characters, because they had taken the time to actually get to know and get into their characters. And so I just needed to throw a problem with them and then create some tension by bringing up limits like, hey, there are people in the town who think he's funny, and yeah, they laugh, but that doesn't mean they're going to like try to overthrow you. Like, what do you what do you do in that situation?
Right.
How do you handle this? You can't just operate with a free hand because you're supposed to be the respectable government. So I created the tension of limits within their realistic set of options. And then they, out of their own self-interest and drive, spend all this time figuring out how to like outmaneuver Grigori the Bard and make beclown him in public in front of everybody, which they did. And it was a super cool, totally non-combat scene, role play heavy, and it was cool. But again, because there was tension in it.
Right.
So
yeah,
good stuff. Yeah, I think you got to balance between the two, but I think you can create problems for yourself if you wed yourself to this like an idea, like a mechanical approach to it.
Right. And that's where, for me, it's always that thing where it's like sometimes you have to remind people that depending on the party, not everything is a fight. Sometimes you have to remind them that you can't talk your way out of everything. You have to find the balance of both.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And back to your thing, like in a game like Traveler, you have far more opportunities in the type of campaign that you're like a traditional Traveler campaign. You have a lot more opportunities to do that. But what's neat is you can breathe a whole lot of like refreshing air into a more traditional RPG like D&D when you create those moments and you remind the players, you don't actually have to just hack it to bits.
Right. And that's where I found that it's really nice to take a little break from one system and go to something else, then come back, because you don't get right out of that mindset immediately. And it makes it very fun to be like, oh, even though I'm back in this other system, I'm still carrying over some of the stuff I did from the one we just did before. And that's great when you're doing a short campaign or an adventure or just a few one-shots in a row of a different, even like not even just like system, but style of setting. And that can make it really fun.
Yeah, I always encourage people to play different games. And I mean, I understand, like, there are a lot of people who they feel like I've invested time and effort and brain power and money into this. This is my game. I'm going to play it. But yeah, when you play different games, different systems and different genres and settings, it's not just the same thing with different costumes. It really is different.
Yep.
Right on. All right. I think we've solved all the world's problems in terms of non-combat encounters.
Hey, that works for me.
All right. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes.